All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Bill Hineline. I'm the field CTO of Chronosphere. Very excited to have you all here to talk about things that I think are near and dear to a lot of engineering and dev leaders' hearts, and that's observability and AI. I've got an elite panelist, set of panelists here today, so I'll let them introduce themselves here just a second. But what we want to talk about specifically today is where the observability and AI space are starting to come together. And then we'll wrap a little bit with some discussion about how SRE life is changing as we talk through AI and even talk a little bit about ITOps and that sort of thing as we talk through all of that. So with that, I'm going to let our panelists each introduce themselves, and I'll turn to JJ and let you introduce yourself first.
Hey, I'm JJ. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Rootly. We build a AI native on-call and incident management platform that's used by all kinds of organizations, everyone from Replit and Webflow all the way to NVIDIA and LinkedIn. Excited to talk more about AI and how it's transforming observability, and for us specifically around incident response and management.
Martin Mao, I'm the CEO co-founder of Chronosphere, observability platform, targeting more of the modern containerized cloud workloads. Generally work with, I would say, the larger enterprises of the world and the bigger tech companies out there.
I'm Zichuan. I'm heading the global AIOps practice at DAMO business at Thoughtworks. So we are a global consultancy company. So we also run business in the managed service side, managing the IT workloads, cloud, also AI workload as well. So we actually partner with Rootly and also Chronosphere, building services, providing services to our customers. So yeah.
Great, thank you three. Specifically, we've spent a number of years, probably a decade now, in the observability space, working with microservices and doing a lot with pulling very ephemeral infra together, really complex environments together. And we're starting to really get good at that as an observability space. But now we've got a new challenge in the AI world, and specifically with models and measuring things like drift of responses and hallucinations and that sort of thing. I was hallucinating myself there just for a moment. And so, I think maybe, Martin, I'll start with you. And why don't you, if you want to maybe talk about what are some of the signals that you're seeing people start to measure with the AI platform?
I would say the first thing we're seeing is, a lot of these workloads are now GPU-based as opposed to CPU-based workloads. So, slightly different and new workloads there at the infrastructure level, especially with the large foundational model creators, I would say. And what's unique about that is not only are they GPUs, but what we found is that often those GPUs are in much larger clusters doing workloads together, as opposed to when you see CPU workloads, they're generally much smaller distributed clusters. So it's a new workload, and they're often operating at a much larger scale, which is interesting. And then as we move up the stack a little bit, we're definitely seeing, to your point, new use cases like tracking of things like hallucination rates and things like that. And the question often then becomes, is that something you should just use your existing observability platform for, or do I need a special LLM observability tool, right? And it's a little bit early to tell because there aren't so many production use cases today, but the one thing we have found is, and the way we think about this is in sort of, I don't know if you can call us traditional observability, but the data types of like metrics, distributed traces, and logs are generally good data types to capture the type of data and workload and workflows there. And that seemingly has mapped pretty well for what we need to observe from these AI applications as well. So if you think about like a hallucination rate, really that's just a measurement of a rate over time. You can create an alert off of it. You can start an incident with it. Like the modeling to the data, it seems to map pretty well. Which probably tells me that this is probably a workload that your existing observability platform can handle. Whereas if you look a few years ago, there was a huge movement in large data, and specialized data observability platforms were built, and those workloads were actually quite different. A lot of them were like batch workloads, and you're sort of not looking at them at real time, and they're sort of comparing runs against each other. So far, it looks like it's a lot more similar to traditional observability, is what we're seeing.
So you sort of answered the question, my next question, but maybe expand on it a little bit with what are people really standing up separate observability environments for monitoring these AI workloads, or are they incorporating into, say, an existing Ollie infrastructure that they have in place?
We're not necessarily seeing separate observability software stood up or stack stood up, just because A, again, the data types are represented quite well, and also B, we're not seeing sort of standalone, I'd say, AI applications. If you think about it, it's really your current applications generally leveraging the models or leveraging some features, some generative AI features, but you still, like, a large part of those workloads are still running on CPU infrastructure. There's still your typical applications that still need to process the requests and whatnot. And because of that, and it's interrelated, there's a huge advantage to have both the normal application data in the same stack as in the same stack that is tracking, let's say, your hallucination rates. And having that data in the one platform and the visibility in the one platform is actually pretty beneficial today.
Great, interesting. All right, so Z, you and JJ have put together a little bit of a demo that we're showing here at Google Next this week, but it really talks about doing what we're talking about with observability and then making sure that it follows sort of a traditional AIOps, keeping people in the loop monitor environment. Between the two of you want to talk a little bit about what that looks like?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I thought is try to focus on the shift left, the observability, because we actually solve problem for our customers, right? The earlier we can solve the problem, identify the problem, the lower cost we can spend into the problem resolution. Right? So that's the reason why we try to push the shift left SRE. That's also the reason why we try to build up the partnership together with Really and also Chronosphere to create an end-to-end AI-driven SRE solution, right? So the connection point is really Chronosphere will manage all the application data, the observability data, including the infrastructure data, and we'll be covering the AI workload data as well. And that will trigger a different alert, logic to Really to work on a Slack platform to work together with SRE engineers, triage the alerts, manage the instant, and some will go to the ticket management system, some will just fix right away, right? So there's different steps and stages that we can also involve the Vertex AI to help triage the alert better, orchestrating the observability data bit together, because at the early stage you have really do the navigation. It's really high cognitive low work. You have to understand what's going on there. There's so many different things. That's why really has create great feature focusing on the observability data orchestration. So we really know what's going on. So that's really everything. We try to connect the dots. The whole idea here is to push the problem finding, problem resolution earlier. So that really resonates with our business model, because we are saying we have to, as a managed service partner, we have to prove our client every year we're saying something. Thank you. So that's really the reason why the shift left SRE concept is super important for us. And building an end-to-end holistic solution was also important. So, because really is really helpful. Like they give us a really good features that we can really integrate with Slack, for example, to really offer something real to our engineering the team to work on those insights and alerts.
I think one thing that's interesting, just tying both what Z said and Martin been saying, with the onset of AI, I mean, the whole industry is leaning so heavily into it now. It's hard to ignore. I think it's equally creating just as many opportunities, kind of what Z is describing for, tools like, the three of ours and services to, help companies be more proactive. But it's also equally creating additional complexity for businesses. And I think that's where a lot of opportunity, for, to adopt, tools like Chronosphere that can help you observe, AI specific workloads come into play. A good example, so we're very downstream. So we see a lot of these companies, various incidents and the rise of, ones that are now created by AI in general. So if you think about a tool like Copilot and Cursor, I was recently in London. We were talking to a PE firm. They have very strict mandates. Every portfolio company has to adopt, one of these IDEs. Everyone has to now code with it. Their view is, if we can make our developers just 5% more effective across, 500,000 developers, we're going to save a ton of money. But what people don't necessarily see sometimes is the fallout and the consequences of what that can create. And that sometimes the code is messier. There's service dependencies that are created that no one knows about. And if you think about like who is best positioned to resolve those incidents in today's world, and even a pre-AI world, it's going to be an engineer that has a great system understanding and has been there for a long time with a ton of tribal knowledge. And what we are seeing emerging now is this new class of incidents that are insanely complex that even your smartest engineer is going to struggle to resolve. So you need tools like observability that can detect, when these drifts and hallucinations occur in your platform, but also, tools like ours and working with partners like Thoughtworks that can help you go in and debug and resolve these, in a quick and efficient manner. So I think, from our perspective, that's quite exciting, just seeing like a whole new market of problems and opportunities equally being created.
It's interesting you say that. It reminds me of like when everyone still is on this containerization journey. Like everyone sees the benefits. They don't think about the additional complexity and the impact of that, right? And we're almost going through that journey again with AI.
Those are great answers. Let's flip the script a little bit and talk now a little bit about, how is AI helping with the observability journey for a company? And, in particular, how is it making life maybe for an SRE better? And what are platforms now looking at doing that maybe incorporates AI into it slightly to make it better? And so let me first, and I'll put this to any of you, Martin, it might be a good one for you first, but when I think about AI and observability tools, where are we seeing the most impact now? Is it really in sort of the massaging of the data and enriching data, or is it more in the Copilot or the agentic world, or where do you see the trend right now, Martin, and where do you think it's going?
Yeah, I love JJ's input on this. From our perspective, what we've seen is just applying, in particular, these LLMs on the raw, unstructured observability data is actually pretty ineffective. It's effective in some use cases, like we've seen summarization of unstructured log data, it's pretty effective on, but you can imagine just looking at the raw data that's been produced in the systems, it actually doesn't do a great job of understanding what the dependencies are, creating your service topology, understanding the standardized ways of creating SLOs and things like that. It's actually not great at that. But what we have found is if we, the observability vendor who owns all of the raw data, can actually add some structure to that data. So we almost structure that data and then feed the structured data and all the relationships into these models, then they become far more effective. So that's an interesting observation we've had. I haven't seen these models be good at being able to do that themselves, and I think it's just a large data problem. Like it's really hard to do that from the outside, but you don't own the data. And often you can see here there are many companies out there like Scale AI, where like their job is to just normalize, clean, and scrub the data. It's the exact same thing in observability. If you can normalize, scrub, and clean the data, the effectiveness of the tools on top is so much higher. Now those agents generally are not good at doing that themselves. Then I think to your second part, we do see value on the agentic side of things a little bit. I think the question, and I'm sure we can have discussion about this, is it one agent or is it many agents working in unison there to solve the problem? But what we'll say about the agent level is like they do add value, but it seems like each new version of a foundational model that comes out just increases that capability. So I haven't really seen specific agents be that much better. They really follow the trend of what the capabilities are of the core foundational model. So I'm going to do that covers that.
I think probably the most exciting thing that we're seeing is still being able to turn a photo of your dog into an anime. I spent countless hours doing that now. We'll see how Chronosphere helps with that.
So, I have a very interesting use case. This is like coming out like the last week working with Australian banks, right? So every weekend they receive a lot of alerts, right? Because the SR engineering team are not there to support like lowest delay. Like, so one problem we try to solve with the customer is they have 30 very similar alerts. Our engineering team must like look at it like a 30 different alerts one by one to think, combine some of them together, group them together to level up some of the priority to those alerts. That's a very, very small problem, but really causing a lot of issues with the banks. So the simple thing we do there is just use a large language model to identify the patterns of those different alerts, right? It's simple as that, right? That really gives us the opportunity to really reduce the lead time of triaging the acknowledge those alerts. So that's definitely a really good example. So Martin was talking about like translating the unstructured data to the structured data. I'm talking about the structured because alerts are structured data. To translate that structured data to unstructured data, which is another translation, because you have to have the human being to interpret what does it really mean by that, what's the outcome, right? So that really goes back to my point of view of shift left the SRE. You always need to use the AI to interpret what's going on there at the as early as possible. So you make decision. That's really we see as a great example of using AI to really help human being to interpret. It's not replacing human. It's just enabling human to make better decisions, because human brain is like always do the interpretation and translation.
Yep.
I totally agree with you. I think the journey to shifting left is finally real, and what we are seeing as an example as well is, you have a low-level alert that comes in, and a tool like ours can do the initial investigation. So we'll go reach out and we'll glean insights and data from Chronosphere or Sentry or Checkly or whatever it may be, or your last 20 GitHub PRs. We'll look at postmortems that you've written in the past, and for a human to be able to quickly aggregate all of that together and make sense of it in a meaningful way and determine what a probable root cause is or what the right investigation path is very time consuming. And so we're noticing, even in the early days right now on low level alerts like a P3, P4, we can get very close to the actual root cause of what's going on in those incidents. And like a site-wide full-blown outage, servers, a million servers are, burning up, it still serves as like a more contextual tool right now, but the opportunity there is really interesting. You can imagine a world where the further left you go, like at the time of code deployment, you can start emulating and simulating what the downstream effects could be or what the impact could be as well.
I think to what you said, and to what you said earlier, the architectures and the environments are so complex. It's not just it's very time consuming. It's getting to the point where one human probably wouldn't be able to do it anyway. So like you sort of need the tools to help. And then just to follow up on the comment and the example about the Australian banks, which we should talk about afterwards. To build on that example, like what we're seeing in that type of example is like you can imagine the Chronosphere platform might be generating a lot of those the initial alerts, right? That the data that I would love to feed to the LLM models is not just, hey, these are the alerts and you can use the text to group them. The structured data we have underneath the covers is we actually know that this service is correlated and downstream from this service, and they're actually related. And we can actually correlate when the alerts happened. And now, I don't know if that's going to magically root cause it, but even providing that correlation information, you can imagine, to the LLMs makes it so much more powerful from like, I'm not just trying to read and group from like the name of the alert or the output, actually having some underlying understanding that how these alerts for these two applications are related to each other. Was there a deployment down here that had an upstream effect? That's some of the additional structure we're trying to add underneath the covers, and then make that available in whatever it suggests, like a root cause may be.
That's definitely the we see in the market that really differentiator. Like the client is asking you a vendor to create that knowledge graph, that ontology level, to accelerate the knowledge retrieval faster. It's not really about like using the fancy tools and platform. It's sometimes really about like how much you can learn about the complex environment, and that environment is keep increasing, the complexity keep increasing, right? That's really part of the advantage that Thoughtworks try to push here, which is we are trying to treat the SRE support work not low level like support work. It's knowledge work as well. It's engineering work. That's really the original story of that. Google built up the SRE is about like 25 years back, right? It's about like they're treating support as engineering work. That's why the challenge that Google give to the team, they say like use the software engineering names mindset to redesign the support organization, right? To us, that's same thing, right? That's why the better tool we can use, but the AI can help us get.
I think from like a data standpoint, I think companies that are building AI, you're either going to innovate on compute, like an NVIDIA, or you're going to innovate on models like an Anthropic, or you're going to innovate on data. And I think data is often seen as, just access to how much data you can gather. But I think what Martin, you're mentioning is, the structure and like the metadata behind the data is also important. Like, us knowing what you've seen as a initial correlation already versus just the raw output is a massive head start. It's also like much more efficient and cheaper for a platform like ours to be able to read into that.
Versus try to figure it out from the outside, for sure. So.
Great. We're going to move on a little bit. And I want to talk now really about this idea of responsible AI adoption and really how it pertains to SRE and DevOps, right? So we hear a lot of talk, and JJ, I think you mentioned this before, people talking about, pressure from above to use AI, right? And finding ways to do it, maybe without the right use case just yet. But so if we have companies doing that, how are we making sure that there's a level of responsibility out there, that we build trust in the AI that we're using, and how do they do that? So to state a specific question, everybody's excited about it, obviously. It's the new thing. What advice do you have for companies that are trying to adopt it, especially for, say, critical workloads?
I think this is a take I haven't really heard too many people talk about. In fact, I was just thinking about it last night. I think one of the things, a lot of companies that are adopting AI are not companies like ours necessarily that are building with AI every single day, understanding at the deep core, the foundational model level, the impacts, the hallucinations that can occur, and that sort of understanding. I think for organizations that do have critical data, it's one thing to rely on vendors to help paint that story, but I think in a lot of ways, there's a lot of marketing fluff out there. Everyone's going to tell you they're the best eval tool and the best this and the best that. To build the right empathy, I think companies that really want to be AI forward and lean into AI should also, whether it's in their product or not, should also develop AI use cases for themselves. Because only then you'll understand, the right tool bench, the right, criteria for safety, and how this technology actually works. And part of our job too is keeping up is a full-time job as well. You might bang your head against the wall on a problem, and 2 weeks later, Anthropic's already solved it for you, and you can move on to a more hairier, tougher challenge. But I found it, at least for us as a team, we manage some of the most, just like Chronosphere, some of the most sensitive data companies will interact with, and that empathy that we've developed by building our own AI applications have given us the ability to then develop the right safety guardrails. And similarly, then you have companies like Thoughtworks that can then advise you on it too.
I think for me, Bill, you sort of said it. I think there is a huge component of building trust, at least in this initial phase. Because at least in the SRE domain, I think to what you said earlier, I think the human still has to make the final decision. The tools can help, the human has to make the final decision. And then it's really just about, does the human trust the recommendations and the analytics that AI is generating? And I think from that perspective, it's as much about having AI tell you how it got there and also what it also ruled out and didn't check. Because often you get a suggestion, you're like, oh, that's interesting, that could be a root cause potentially. But it's also, I think, builds trust in showing the work, showing, hey, actually, I checked all these other things and I've ruled out all these other possibilities. This is how I arrived at my answer. I think tools and solutions that do that can only continue to build trust. And then again, I think in the SRE space, the stakes are high. If you make a mistake or you take the wrong actions, I think the impact on a business's product or service is high. So I do think it will take probably a little bit longer, to potentially completely remove the human out of the loop, and that will take a long time. But yeah.
Yeah, I think the market has white space. I see, because I work a lot of clients, they're asking a different demands for AI operation and everything. But one case, I work with an energy company. Their comment was they have a 30 people ML team, the huge company, $1 billion company. But usually ML team is just small, like boutique store. Their question is like, we build up the internal AI chatbot, but business users are asking question, why this AI, they generate the response like this? Yeah. They cannot answer. They don't have the bandwidth to answer that. Like, because ML teams is like focused on data science, like engineering, building pipeline, everything. They cannot answer every question, right? That really hinder the adoption of AI. But that's only one case. I see not many companies ask that question. To me, that's a happy problem because their adoption of AI is reaching to some level that creates the operational needs, right? So that's one thing I see from the market. Another thing I see in the market is really from the demands, the supply side, which is from the SRE community side. If you think about hallucination, what is a hallucination? There is a difference between hallucination and error. Because traditionally we're dealing with all the bugs, the errors. They're logical failures. Like, we know there's gone something wrong with it. But hallucination and also trust, there's a level, there's spectrum of things. So you have to have people to understand what's going on to drive the AI explainability. I don't think in the market, the platform, SE pop, even the Chronosphere and Grouply, I think there is a big market for we together to think about building something to drive, because that's a different logic to support SRE metric. Because SRES still means the site, right? But it turned this site to be AI application. It's totally different. Yeah. So we don't have an answer yet in the market. So to me, the market is not there yet because adoption is super massive. And also from the supply side, we also have the opportunity to grow some new offerings and services.
I really do think it's down to the platforms and tools to provide that explainability. Can you imagine having a small ML team internally go and explain how all of these tools, it's just not, it's not scalable, it's impossible. So.
Show the math.
Yeah.
We got to show the math.
You have to.
So let's do a quick lightning round. We're getting to the end of the talk here, but Z, you kind of started down the path of a prediction of what this all could look like in the next 6, 10 months or 12 months. So we heard from Z. Martin, you want to give us your take on what you might predict for
the world is going to
I mean, maybe more specific to these topics, but yeah.
The big question that's in my mind right now is, even if you think about the SRE lifecycle and shifting left, there's many different platforms that have to be integrated and work together end to end for a particular use case. The question in my mind is, do each of these platforms, like really, I think you have an AI agent right now, do each of these platforms create their own AI agent? And the AI agents have to work together and communicate to each other in some particular way. Or obviously, MCP right now is very popular. Do we have fewer agents that can interact with different data from different sources? For us, actually, I think because the typical job of an SRE, they need to interact with observability, incident management, CI/CD, all of those things. I actually think in our world, it makes a lot more sense for fewer agents, maybe the foundational models to provide the core agents, and then just us have that sort of MCP interface to our data I think in observability in particular, I don't know if it's the same for incident management. In observability in particular, what's even more interesting about this is the industry has already consolidated on open source standards like OpenTelemetry and Prometheus. And so it just makes it much easier then that it's not a vendor specific interface. You can actually have a pretty open source based standard and interface to all of the observability data. So I think that I suspect that's how that's going to unfold, but I think there's going to be a lot of development there in the next 6 months, and yeah, I'm keeping a close eye on that for sure.
Nothing on tariffs, though.
On tariffs, well, that's a whole separate conversation, but yeah.
Well, this is the lightning round, so we're going to keep going.
Yeah.
I would totally agree.
JJ?
I think, right now evals are, one of the hottest things in AI. I think standards is the one thing that isn't talked about too much. The way that we view it is work that's being done is primarily still human driven. But the interesting thing, and I think SREs in general are probably the most skeptical audience when it comes to adopting any sort of AI, having to touch any sort of production data and making any sort of production changes. But everyone that we've talked to is cautiously optimistic, from governments to banks to startups. Everyone is eager, and there's excitement, optimism to explore it. And the way that we see it is it'll be a mixture of humans working alongside agents. Where that work will occur is probably not just in our platform or just in their platform. There'll be new platforms that, this combination and interaction will then occur. And I think it's important for companies and vendors and employees as well to embrace that instead of, necessarily resisting. Because we'll find a lot more productivity out of everyone when that happens. But I think what we were saying earlier around some of the insights and the data, the raw data that you guys gather and how that's then shared with a platform like ours, I think is incredibly interesting. Like right now, the way platforms interact is maybe MCP if you're really on the bleeding edge right now, but otherwise, we're just using generic APIs. And I don't think that's how platform to platform interactions will occur.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you, all three of you. Great discussion on really interesting topics. Thanks to all of you for joining us. And we look forward to hearing from folks again on this topic. And thanks again.